If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Parents, what is the creepiest / most frightening thing one of your kids has said to you? While playing classroom with my 3-year-old brother, he made an offhanded comment about being in my mother's belly twice. I was amused and said, "Oh really?" He proceeded to tell me in amazing detail being inside our mother. He told me about it being warm and that he liked it, but he always felt sick. One day he got so sick that they came and told him he had to leave. He didn't want to, so they promised him he would get to came back again and back to our mom. So he left and they let him come back again, and this time he didn't feel sick. I lost my mind and started screaming for my mother. He told her the same story. Then after she stopped crying, we were not allowed to talk about it. I was 10 and I was old enough to remember that she had a miscarriage almost 1 year before my brother was born. Side note, I'm not religious, but my brother always kinda makes me wonder. When my cousin was around 12 or so, she's almost 30, we were sitting around the table eating dinner and she very quietly left the table to rummage through her room, followed by her brother's room across the hallway. After about 15 minutes she comes back empty-handed, cleans her area and proceeds to sit in front of the TV. Her mother and brother asked what she was looking for. She replied, "A man just asked for a blanket because he's cold. I couldn't find an extra one to give to him." We entertained it and asked what he looked like. She gave a random description of an older man with a scruffy beard, brown shirt and dirty jeans. At that age we just chalked it up as imagination and left her alone. About an hour later the doorbell rings and my aunt answers it. She returns a few seconds later clearly shaken up and says, "There's a homeless man asking for a spare blanket." He's the man she was talking about. We all go to the door with my aunt to give him the blanket to see the scruffy homeless man in a dirty brown shirt and jeans. He politely takes the blanket, thanks her and leaves. My cousin states that was the man she was trying to help earlier. Shit freaked me out for years. Not my kid, but a kid my friend and I met at a party about 8 years ago. It's more of a story than just one thing she said. So, my friend and I were in 8th grade, and we were with her mother for some kind of party, and there was this little girl who couldn't have been any older than 5. She was the only other kid there, so my friend's mom made us go play with her. This was the creepiest girl I've ever met. She asked us if we wanted to play a game, and we said sure. The game was called Kill You and it worked by her jumping on us and trying to strangle us. We told her we didn't want to play that game anymore, so she came up with a new game. You be the mommy, and you be the daddy. Then I'll kill the mommy, and I'll kill the daddy. She played that game the same way as Kill You, by jumping on us and trying to strangle us. After we got her off us, she walked away into the kitchen and started looking for stuff. We asked her what she was looking for, and she replied with a knife to kill you with. Her mom saw her in the kitchen and asked if she needed something. She said she was thirsty or hungry or something. Anyway, this kid was creepy. I think the only reason we didn't run away screaming was because she was less than 1/3 our size, and it was just too odd to really think it was real. We still talk about that creepy kid sometimes. I've got a couple of freaky incidents which have followed the family. One. I was laying in bed next to my wife, who was fast asleep, and all of a sudden I could hear someone shouting, "Daddy! Daddy!" I thought it was either my daughter or son, and I went to check up on them both, but they were both fast asleep, so I went to the bathroom before I headed back to bed and heard someone shout, "Daddy! Daddy!" I thought I heard it come from downstairs, and went down into the kitchen. Then all of a sudden the phone rang, and it my mother telling me that my grandma was dying, and I was to head straight to the hospital. Till to this day, I do not know who or what was shouting "Daddy," but I do know it was certainly not my children. 2. It was the middle of the afternoon, and my wife decided to take my son and daughter out for something to eat as a treat at our local farm shop, so I decided to take a well-deserved nap. I woke up feeling cold, the heating had just turned off, and I could hear some men talking quite loudly, so I just presumed I must have left the living room TV on, and I went to turn it off, but the TV was not on and the room absolutely stunk of cigar smoke. Now none of us smoke and there were no signs of any cigars in the living room. 3. I was living in Munster, Germany, at the time, as I was in the Grenadier Guards 2nd Battalion and we had been living in Munster for a couple of years. We moved into a new officer's quarters. At this point in time my daughter had not yet been born. Myself and my wife could often hear our son appear to be talking and laughing to himself in his bedroom, so of course we thought he is at that age, he must have an imaginary friend, etc., etc. It was time for him to go to bed one evening and he said he wanted to continue to play with the little white-haired boy. My wife turned around and said, "Oh, is that what your imaginary friend is called?" He turned around and said, "No, he has not told me his name, plus everyone knows imaginary friends are not real, silly mummy." We continued to still think absolutely nothing of it. Then a couple of months had passed and we had made some new friends on base and invited them over with the little boy for a play date without son. Now I swear to God, and on my father's grave the kid outright refused to enter my son's bedroom, and when we nudged him inside he screamed in absolute hysterics and kept shouting, "Don't let him near me." We were getting quite concerned at this point. I mentioned it to a couple of colleagues and they said the previous tenants spoke of the exact same thing and made a complaint to the housing officer. So I spoke to the housing officer and he showed me reports of the complaint saying their daughter had too been speaking to someone who she called the white boy. It turned out that a child had died some years previously in the same house from a cot death. We soon moved out of that house once we were told. I used to babysit for my cousins all the time when I was in college for extra money. My youngest cousin, Gabe, had always done strange things, like see people and talk to people who weren't there. Two things still creep me out to this day. First thing he did while I was watching him that creeped me out, I slept in the guest bedroom right next to his. One night I woke up and thought I heard voices. I got up and walked to the doorway and I see Gabe sitting on the stairs with his arm up in the air. He keeps saying hello. Over and over. Then he says, "It's Gabe, what's yours?" All my arm hairs stood on end and I flipped the lights on. I very gently guided him back to his room. It was clear he was sleepwalking and I chalked it up to being a dream, until I started to walk out. He said my name and I looked back at him. "Yeah, buddy?" I said. "That was O," he told me. He was trying to say hi. He said he misses you. At this point I about shit myself. Owen was my aunt's first husband who passed away in a car accident when they were 23. I looked remarkably like my aunt when she was 20. My cousin did not, and still does not, know that my aunt was ever married before she married my uncle. Second thing my cousin did was on our way to my grandma's funeral. He asked me if we were going to the graveyard. I said yes. And he says, "Oh good. We get to meet grandma's new friend George and his dog." Guess the name on the headstone next to my grandma's. Yeah, creepy as hell. And that's only the beginning of all the creepy things Gabe has seen/said. My mom swears that I scared the living daylights out of her as a child. Haven't seen her in a long time because of a divorce and separation, but we used to live in a 3-story house in Chicago with a back porch with indoor creepy stairs. According to my mom, I refused to go play outside with my cousins and stayed in that back porch in the darkness, using the faint glow of the kitchen light to play with my toys. She thought I was voice acting for my action figures, when, suddenly, my bike is thrown down the stairs to the basement level, where it's pitch black. My aunt, my grandma, and my mom all run to me and start asking me why I threw the bike. I cried and swore that I didn't do it. It wasn't me. It was my hand. My mom responds, "So you did it. Go pick it up." I reply with, "No." Something grabbed my hand. Freaked everyone out. Funny thing is, some traumatic things happened with the separation that actually blocked out some of the memories of Chicago. I didn't know about this story until my mom told me a few years back. Not a parent, but was babysitting for family friends, 2 girls, aged 3 and 9 and a boy, aged 7. The parents were going to a wedding, so I was staying over in their place for the night. It's an older house, built partially in the 19th century, and is beautiful, but creaky and makes weird noises. I was told to expect that, and to ignore it. Put the kids to bed early, and was watching TV, and heard noises upstairs, so just assumed it was one of the kids moving around, or the house settling, having lived in an old house my entire life. I went to bed, about midnight, after checking all the 3 kids, who were fast asleep and tucked up. Fast forward to 3 a.m., and I woke up for no reason, could hear the noises again, so went to check on the kids. The older 2 were sound asleep, but couldn't find the 3-year-old, bed empty. Ran downstairs and found her staring at the kitchen wall, which was part of the old house that had been renovated. When I asked her what she was doing, she just looked at me and said Anya wants to go outside and play. When I told her parents about it the next day, her mother went pale. All 3 kids have seen a little girl in the old part of the house on separate occasions, and they found the kids standing in front of that wall at different times, because there used to be a door there leading to the old farm. When she has asked them why, they keep telling her Anya wants to play outside. They have no idea who Anya is, but all 3 kids have given the same description of her. Haven't babysat there since. Ever since I was about 4 I had problems with the paranormal. Starting toys moving and making noises by themselves. It would usually occur around 2 a.m. Our neighbor told us a woman lost her toddler in the bedroom my brother and I shared, after he choked on his pacifier. We didn't really think much of it and moved across town to a larger house. When we first moved in we noticed one bedroom had not been moved out by the previous family. It appeared to be a little girl's room. It was odd because nothing was touched. Everything was perfectly in place like she still lived there, except for the Barbie dolls on the ground. In further examination we noticed blood stains trailing from the bedroom door, into the closet and then under the bed. The stains were kind of faint, someone tried to clean up. That night my brother and I started moving all of her stuff out of the bedroom and into the garage. We stopped to play with our Ghostbuster action figures for a while sitting in the bedroom. Out of nowhere we both heard a faint voice. Not in the room but outside our window. We were both too chicken shit to open the blinds, so we ran to our parents. Of course they said we were just hearing things, so we went back into the room. Again the voice came back a lot louder than before. Clearly we could make out the voice saying help me. We about shit a brick and ran to our parents again. They went with us down to the bedroom and we all just stood there silent. Again the voice shouted help me. My dad looked at my mom with his jaw down to his knees and proceeded to walk to the window. He opened up the blinds to find a cat. The cat was a huge orange long hair. The cat said it again, help me, and took off. We didn't see the cat again until I met a kid around the block. His backyard bordered mine. We became good friends. I saw the cat sitting underneath his grandfather's truck. I told him what had happened and he said that his name was Chester, and that he knew how to talk. He knew a few phrases, help me mommy don't hurt me and hello. I do not shit you, this cat sounded exactly like a human. He also told me that this cat belonged to a girl that used to live in my house and that she was his best friend until she went to heaven. About 2 years pass and my younger brother and I are sitting playing with chalk in the driveway. A woman shows up out of nowhere and starts talking with us. Normal talk, nothing out of the ordinary until she says your sister looks sad, you should let her play with you guys. My younger brother and I looked at each other confused. She then says, isn't that your little sister in the window? We turned around and saw nothing but our blinds moving back and forth. We looked at the woman and explained that we don't have a sister and a little girl doesn't live in the house. She nearly has a heart attack and asked us to speak with our parents. She told our parents what she saw, and explained what had happened in our bedroom about 8 years prior to us moving in, which would be around 85. Apparently the little girl was murdered by her abusive father. He banged her head into the wrought iron fence in the backyard. She crawled down the hall into her bedroom to hide in the closet. When her father he grabbed her and pulled her out, threw her on the floor, at which point she crawled under the bed. He dragged her out and punched her in the face. I think he even went so far as to put a cigarette out on her forehead. She died of blood loss. Her father drove to the desert to blow his brains out. Never heard anything about her mom. Other than the neighbors would hear screams night and day coming from the house. Not me, little brother. Most nights he would go on sleep rambles, but sometimes he would act extremely strange. He shared a bunk bed with my other little brother, and was on the top bunk, so everyone would know when he was sleepwalking because we would hear him climb down. How he did this while asleep, I don't know. One night I woke up at around 2 a.m. and heard the creaking of his bed, and recognized it as my brother walking again, but it didn't click that he was actually asleep. So I hear him coming downstairs. My bedroom is on the ground floor, and assume he is getting a drink from the kitchen or something. Then I hear my door open. I'm whiffing at this point and look over the side of my bunk bed, own room, desk underneath, and see him standing beside my ladder, looking up at the top. He turned his head like he was watching me and stared. His eyes were open and glazed, which made it even stranger. My mother had heard him going downstairs and came down after him, just got to my room and was shushing him and trying to quietly wake him up. He turned his head to her and told her that she didn't belong there, leave. Needless to say, I didn't go back to sleep. My 3.5-year-old nephew has been telling these stories since his family moved here, when he had just turned 2. At the house they rented for a year, he would come flying into his parents' room, bawling about the frogs in his room. He'd explain they come in through the walls, and they are tall, and they have guns, and they have huge eyes, and they stare at him and, I think, talk to him. He started sleeping with his parents again to combat this. Every time they get him back into his room, the frogs would visit. It crossed over into their new house as well, only in his new room there is a certain hole the frogs enter and exit from. He's more comfortable with them now, and talks about them matter of fact like they are just part of his nighttime routine. The way he describes them to us in detail looks remarkably, to us, like gray aliens. Since our family is a bit steeped in supernatural/alien stuff, it's really off-putting and creepy to all of us. He also has this house. He's asked his mother before, when are we going home? I want to go home. She clarifies, the house in Iowa, where he was born, or the rental house here. He says neither. My real home. The house in the woods. The kid has never been to any houses in the woods, and he can describe this place like he's been there, and the story is always the same every time, just like it is with the frogs. Another time, They were entering their house and it was a bit dark prior to his mom turning on a light, and he jumped, and said, "Oh, you scared me." His mom asked who scared him. He replied, "Oh, it's just the little girl." He talks about her a lot, but he also has mentioned that she is just in his head. He also has voices in his head, talks to himself or laughs to himself, and when asked, he replies with something like, "Oh, it's just the voices. They're in my head. I see dead people" jokes. Or, "Gosh, my nephew is a weirdo. At times he's cried in his parents' arms, screaming for his mom or dad. He'll be in my brother's grasp, screaming he wants his mommy, and she comes, but he says no, he wants his real mommy, and steps away from them both crying for his real parents." It's usually before or after this that house in the woods gets mentioned. I really want the kid to be trolling us, but I spend a lot of time with him, and I can tell when he's being a dipshit and when he's serious. I am sad to inform that he's serious about all that. I should preface this by saying that the house we lived in at the time was an older wartime home, presumably built by a returning soldier. When my daughter was about 2, she was upstairs having a nap in her room while I was downstairs making lunch. I started hearing some strange noises from upstairs, but I shrugged it off as my daughter waking up from her nap. A few minutes later I hear my daughter talking to someone. Bear in mind it's just myself and my daughter in the house. My wife is at work. I'm not overly concerned at this point because my daughter was and continues to be something of a chatterbox, but I head upstairs to see what the situation is. I step into her room to the sight of her sitting up in her bed, facing the wall opposite the door, having a conversation with seemingly no one. I ask her who she is talking to and she turns around and says the people daddy. Kids being kids, I play along and ask her what they are saying as I pick her up to take her downstairs to have lunch. They say they don't like us. After that feeling in the base of my spine went away, she had my attention and I asked her who said that to her. "The people daddy, don't you see them?" was her answer. Cue me turning around, looking up, and seeing the antique porcelain dolls my wife's grandmother left her staring directly into the deepest parts of my soul. Nope. I have a few more stories of strange happenings in that house. Needless to say, we no longer live there. I used to wake up, see my parents standing over me, and when I'd ask what was wrong, they would vanish. I also had a recurring dream in which the next relative to die would be standing in our old house. We still live in the same one, but it's been extensively remodeled, having a party with all my dead relatives. I was playing gypsy using my snow globe as a crystal ball and said bad things would happen the night before the 1994 Northridge earthquake. I once got out of my crib, I was 2, and distinctly remember watching all the cupboards open and all the stuff come floating out to orbit around me. My parents found me surrounded by all that stuff, which I could not have gotten out of the top cupboards. I have frequent déjà vu, to the point of telling people where they can find misplaced objects in their house that I've never been to before. Dad had the ability to sense things from items that he would handle and focus on. The lights at my grandma's house have flickered by themselves and in response to talking/asking questions since my grandpa died. There's a child's ghost haunting my preschool. He used to haunt the church until he followed the class I teach into our room. We had water damage in the classroom and had to use the back hall of the church as a temporary classroom. He moves things, we see him out of the corner of our eyes, doors open by themselves, it's ridiculous. We named him Finn. I don't have any children, but one evening when I was 17 I was in charge of babysitting these 2 little girls, aged 3 and 5, overnight. At about 9 p.m. I put them to bed and went downstairs to watch TV on the couch, with the baby monitor on the table beside me. They were both quiet for a while, but then I started hearing the 3-year-old talking to someone over the monitor. She was talking in a hushed voice, saying, "Please get out of my room. Leave me alone." I assumed that her sister had come into her room and was bothering her, so I went upstairs to tell them to go to their own rooms and go to sleep. I peeked in the 5-year-old's door, but she was sound asleep. So then I stood outside the 3-year-old's door for a while listening and heard her continue talking to someone. I opened the door and she had a guilty look on her face. I asked her who she was talking to, but she wouldn't say anything. She just asked if I would cuddle with her because she was scared. So I laid on her bed with her and told her to close her eyes and try to go to sleep. She closed her eyes tight and then started mumbling frantically. I couldn't understand what she was saying, but she sounded very frightened. I laid with her in bed until she finally fell asleep, and then I went back downstairs. About an hour later I heard the little girl's voice over the monitor again and she distinctly spoke the words, "Please don't hurt Amanda." Yes, I am Amanda. I was very spooked the rest of the night. A childhood friend of mine shared a bedroom with his little brother. One night he noticed that his brother, about 5 years old, had packed rolled up towels along the bottom of the bedroom curtains, which I remember were fairly thin and just a bit too short for the window. He'd also taped the curtains shut as high as he could reach. When he was asked, my friend's brother said it was because of the peeker. Naturally, his parents got involved at this point, and questioned him further. Apparently he'd woken up in the wee hours for 2 nights in a row and seen a hunched figure at the window glaring up at his bunk. The man had a broken face and a wavy line mouth. Whatever that means, I know, for me, it was all the more terrifying because the choice of words were so vague and menacing. Note, I lived 2 houses down and was about 12, so this had me terrified for a while. He said that on the first night he whispered as loud as he could to try and wake his big brother on the bunk below, but he wouldn't stir. The man at the window opened and closed his mouth and went away. On the second night, he woke to see the man in the same position, staring up at him, but now he was working at the edges of the window pane, frantic and angry. He was frozen with fear, fell asleep, woke up to find the man had gone. My friend's dad examined the window from the outside but saw no evidence of tampering. He backed his car into the darkest part of the driveway and sat out there all night for the next 2 nights with a claw hammer, waiting for this peeker to show up. He never showed, of course. In retrospect, I think it was a repeated sleep paralysis episode. A few years back, some of the family and I went and stayed at a cabin deep in the Adirondacks. The youngest kid, one of my cousins, was about 3 or 4 then. About the 3rd night, it was particularly foggy out, so we retired early. I remember waking up randomly in the middle of the night, hearing a loud thud/scratching noise against one of the walls. I quietly peeked out the window to see what it was, and I couldn't see much over the fog. I disregarded it, as it was probably a raccoon, and I laid back down. Then I heard a voice outside. It sounded like a small child. I was worried that one of the kids snuck out of bed and went outside. The Adirondacks are teeming with wildlife, including black bears and coyotes, so naturally I was worried. I grabbed my flashlight and gathered my nerves as I opened the front door. A billow of fog whooshed in, making everything 10 times creepier. I went around the side of the cabin, by my window, and as I approached it, I made out a shape. It looked like a small child. I was relieved. I asked my cousin if he was all right, but he didn't reply. He didn't even turn to look at me. He just sat there in the mist, stone-like. I got closer and shined my flashlight at him. He was sitting there, surrounded by what looked like drawings in the dirt. I picked him up to take him back inside when I saw it. He was sitting in a pentagram. My heart sort of skipped a beat when I saw it, and I accidentally lost my hold on my cousin. He screamed and crawled away, under the cabin. I still can't get the scream out of my head, it was blood-curdling. When my breath came back to me, and my brain recovered from the shock, I went into panic mode and sprinted back inside to wake the others. I turned the lights on and told everyone that he was missing, and was hiding underneath the cabin for some reason. Everyone was worried, and as we were about to head back into the mist, out came my 3-year-old cousin holding his stuffed Snorlax, from out of his bedroom. I stood there in disbelief. What the hell did I pick up out there? MFW, I realized I was Satan, and I was the one that drew the pentagram. Walking through a rough part of my town with my 3-year-old nephew. He suddenly pipes up with the question of why are some people black? So I explained to him that for a long time people live in different countries and their skin is a different color because of the sun. I was very proud of my explanation. I should mention at this point that in no way am I, his parents, or anyone I know of the nature to teach him the content below. The only thing I can think of is that it came from his old-fashioned grandparents on the father's side. He thinks for a bit, and I can see his cogs turning, then he suddenly pipes up with I don't like black people. I think they should go back to where they came from. My heart stops and I look around. 3 big black guys are watching me and I have no idea if they heard, but I ran. I ran like I was being chased by the nemesis from Resident Evil. Then sat him down and had a talk about why what he said was wrong. I thought I was never gonna get out of there alive. So this one time I woke up in the middle of the night and hear this creaking and shuffling noise coming from down the hall. This was unusual because I never wake up in the middle of the night and there's usually a complete absence of creaking and shuffling in the hallway. I then hear one of my kids start crying, and that never happens either because I always tell the little bastards to shut up and then raise my fist up and make my unhappy face at them. So I get up out of bed, my fist ready, and what looks vaguely like my youngest son is already standing at the very end of the hallway, mostly in the shadows so I can barely make him out. And, for some reason, he's standing completely still and has his back turned. So I call out, "Why the cockshit aren't you asleep, Elroy? You want another epic ass kicking?" Then suddenly, he jumps like 2 feet in the air and takes off further away into the house, knocking shit over. I start to chase but I pause to look into my kid's room. I do a double take because all my kids are in there, my youngest son still crying. I asked him what the hell was going on. He looks at me and says, "The Oompa Loompa took our Tonka car." I looked down at the floor with a shudder. That fucking RC Tonka car cost me a cool $80. Then I felt a sudden, distinct chill and my son, this time almost whispering, asked, "Dad, who is the dark lady standing behind you?" I turned around slowly because I remember asking my father the same question when I 8 years old one stormy night in the rustic New England cottage I had dwelt as a child. It was my mother. She had gotten a bad sunburn earlier in the day. "Bitch," I told her, "stop sneaking up on people and watch the goddamn kids." I pick up my aluminum bat and shout after the fucker who took my son's toy, "I don't care if you're 7 years old. I'm taking $80 out of the side of your skull, motherfucker." That was when the back door window shattered, accompanied by heavy grunting. I jumped through the opening and gave chase. From somewhere in front of me, I hear an indescribable howling that was unearthly, or possibly the two neighbor dogs fucking in the approaching alleyway. He took a turn, then another, and then another. He was trying to shake me, but I didn't give up. Oompa Loompa, mere 7-year-old, indescribable entity, pair of fucking neighbor dogs, or whatever else lay ahead, it was not getting away. I started running full speed and could finally see my unknown foe ahead. The next morning at the breakfast table, my morbidly obese wife started nagging me about all the commotion from the other night. I told her to chill, get me my hot chocolate and kicks. But she was insistent and wanted to know how things ended up. So I pointed at the headline in the morning paper, "Body found at Williamton Creek." I read aloud, 43-year-old Carl Powers, who suffered from severe dwarfism, was found dead this morning lying in the river. His body was covered in bruises and several bones were broken. I gestured proudly towards my bloody bat in the corner of the room. "See? I took care of everything." My wife nodded approvingly. Then my youngest son spoke up. The words he said stunned me into silence. "That doesn't sound like the little Chinese woman who took my truck last night." I have a few things I remember from when I was a kid. 1. I grew up in Alberta, Canada, and when I was about 4 years old, there was a government-owned telephone company named AGT that had commercials featuring a humorous Albert Einstein character. Anyway, every time this commercial came on, I would stand up, walk over to the TV, and stand in front of it, trying to cover the TV with my body. Then, I would fall into a weird trance and begin to dream. In the dream, I'm in a large room with my family in one corner of the room and in the Albert Einstein character at the other corner. I was standing somewhere in the middle, trying to walk towards my family, and suddenly the Einstein man was right behind me and would grab me up in his arms. I would start crying and he started carrying me away from my family, and I could see in my mother's eyes that she was upset and was trying to get me back, but she couldn't move. At this point, I would come out of the trance and I would wake to my family trying to tell me to get out of the way of the TV. I remember telling my family what had happened, but they told me that I was just dreaming. The thing is that I remember doing this every single time that commercial came on TV. Weird. 2. I remember when I was about 3 that me and 2 of my sisters all had our own beds, but we slept in the same bedroom. All of our beds were oriented in such a way that our feet pointed towards the large window that was fairly high off the floor. Well, one night, I was looking through the pictures of a Dr. Seuss book with the lamp on by my bed. I was the only one awake, as I often stayed up late. The window was open, and I remember hearing a woman laughing in the distance, and the laughing seemed to be getting closer and closer. Soon, I heard it right below the window outside, and then a woman climbed up the window and sat there on the windowsill with most of her body inside the room. She looked at me and cackled. I nervously chuckled back at her. She laughed again, and I laughed back. She then turned and jumped down, and I could hear the laughing getting more distant. I tried waking my sister, who was sleeping in the bed right beside mine, but it seemed like she wasn't waking up even though she was usually easily awoken. I just lied down and tried to fall asleep. I told my mom the next day that a witch came to my window, but I was told that it was just a dream. 3. Again, when I was about 3 or so, I remember waking up very late one night after having wet the bed. Don't judge me. The room was pitch black. My sister and I slept in the same bed at this point, poor her. My dog was sleeping at the foot of the bed. The door to our room was open to the living room, which was also dark. I sat there awake for a few moments and I suddenly began hearing loud drums, as if a person had a complete drum set in the living room, except most of the percussions were snare drum and cymbal sounds. My dog began barking loudly and growling. When I first heard this, I got really scared, so I shut my eyes tight. Amazingly, as soon as I shut my eyes, the drumming stopped entirely, but the dog continued barking. I kept them closed for a few moments, and when I opened them, the drumming was still there as if I had just unmuted the sound. My dog continued barking, but I shut my eyes tight, pulled the covers over my head, and must have eventually fallen asleep. 4. Last one. In the same house as story number 3 and around that same time, I distinctly remember waking up late one night to go to the bathroom. I have no idea what time it was, but to get to the bathroom, you had to go into the living room, through the kitchen, past my parents' room, and then into the bathroom. I remember walking into the bathroom, turning on the light, and standing there urinating. I looked up at the smaller window above the toilet and I saw what I would describe as about 2 to 3 Smurfs with very large eyes looking into the window. I recognized Papa Smurf, but I don't know who the other 2 were. They looked really dazed or something. They didn't seem to be the happy-go-lucky Smurfs I was used to. When I saw them, I quickly finished up and ran out of the bathroom and back to bed. That's really all I remember of that incident.